With that, I'd like to introduce to the podium Director Stanton, who's going to talk about one man's story, where we were, where we are, and where we can be. Director Stanton.
Thank you very much, Margaret. I'm supposed to be hooked up. I'm supposed to be. Thank you, Margaret, for that gracious introduction. I tell you, it's a pleasure, honor, and a privilege to be with you. And I want to thank you, Derek, for that kind invitation. And certainly to be with my two distinguished fellow panelists, Elwood and Steve, is an honor within itself. When Derek invited me to join with you on this occasion, a very important occasion, I had the opportunity to reflect on two recent experiences. One was to visit Grand Teton National Park, to visit with the leadership there as they engaged in two programs connecting our youth with conservation and with national parks. The other was to be invited by my former colleagues in the Park Service to spend 2 days at the Lyndon Baines Johnson National Historical Park in my home state of Texas. And then, Derek, as it occurred to me to just reflect on our attendance at a memorial service on May the 6th, honoring one of this nation's greatest conservation leaders, who was always behind the scene, but nevertheless played an important role. I speak of none other than Henry L. Diamond. But in driving to South Interior this morning, I came across Memorial Bridge, and immediately in front of me is the memorial to the 16th President of the United States. So I also reflected on another experience which I had on December the 11th in Emancipation Hall on U.S. Capitol grounds. There was a very moving ceremony led by President Obama, and the participation, the bipartisan participation of the leadership of Congress, to pause for an hour or so to reflect on the 150th anniversary of that which occurred in December of 1865. That event occurred 75 years before I was born. And to think about that, I trembled. That was the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, abolishing slavery. And as I came across the bridge this morning, I thought about the sentiments in the context of what we're talking about today, connecting America, all America, with the rich and the diversity of this nation's bounty, its natural and cultural resources. And the sentiments of the 16th President of the United States in his second inaugural address, which arguably the most effective inaugural address ever delivered, notwithstanding President Obama's, of course. He concluded, and I paraphrase, "With malice towards none, let us go forth binding up the nation's wounds." given shortly before the closing of the most defining period in our collective history, the U.S. Civil War. So in thinking about where we are today and from which we have come and where we might go, I thought it might be mutually advantageous to sort of establish a frame of reference of where we have come since 1865. I'm caught with a challenge in doing that, but as I've always encouraged by Derek, is just to fall back on those two innate characteristics for which all native Texans are known. Simply this: humanity and brevity, and not necessarily in that order. But I will be brief. It is interesting just to look where we've come as a nation over 150 years. The great Western expansion, notwithstanding the atrocities wrought on American Indians as we expanded the settlement beyond the Mississippi River. Think about the Homestead Act set in the great Midwest. Think about the establishment of large recreational preservation areas: Yellowstone, Sequoia, Yosemite, Mount Rainier. Think about the Morrill Act establishing land-grant colleges. Think about what was perhaps being achieved under the Reconstruction Act. We were moving seemingly as a nation to bind up our wounds as a collective society. But lo and behold, unfortunately in 1896, there was a bump in the road. There was a bump in the road which governed the first 24 years of my life and my contemporaries. And it left a stain which is difficult to erase. And it is a stain that we still live with in terms of the lack of full inclusion. And that stain resulted from a Supreme Court decision in 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, the doctrine of separate but equal. Separate but equal. I was 24 years of age before I could enter the front door of a cafe to order a cup of coffee where my mother served as a short order cook. Playgrounds not available. Dallas Fairground, only one day out of the year, Negro Achievement Day. Those experiences, those stains still exist, but collectively I think we can heal them or bind up the nation's wound. But what has kept all of us encouraged, that even during some of those difficult periods, moving towards that beautiful first word, the first beautiful pronoun, collective pronoun, we, as in we the people. I think about Secretary Harold Ickes, Roosevelt, Secretary of the Interior. He said that while public accommodations, playgrounds, parks might be denied outside of national parks, I will guarantee over my signature in a secretarial order dated 1945 that all facilities in national parks will be accessible to all who come. They have pictures available at Shenandoah here in my adopted home state of Virginia, saying campground for coloreds, campground for white. Harold Acres said, even without the force of law, I'm going to do this. If you get to Shenandoah, although you may be denied privileges outside, don't worry. All facilities would be accessible to us. And I believe that set into motion some other things to occur. We all know that in 1948, President Truman issued his presidential order integrating the military forces of the United States. Sort of sad to think about we fought our wars as segregated units. So there was courage in the midst of difficulty. And lo and behold, in 1954, the Supreme Court would declare, we find in the field of public education, we find unanimously in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. But that only spoke to education. It didn't speak to any other institution. So we are very proud that in 1964, there was the passage of the Civil Rights Act, making all facilities, federal, state, public, and private, hopefully free of discrimination and open to all. So the question arises that while we can appreciate all the progress that was made from 1865 to the 60s, which was, in my judgment, sort of the watershed of the recreation, parks, conservation movement. And I will just cite a couple of things with respect to the 1960s and then sort of reflect on where I think we may be going further into the 21st century. We are all indebted to the enlightenment of leadership in the public and the private sector in the 50s and the 60s that has given us some advantages and some benefits where we are today. I think more importantly about ORC, if you will, the shorthand for Outdoor Recreation Resource Commission, Review Commission, authorized by Congress in 1959. The commission chaired by Lawrence Rockefeller, who in 1962 personally delivered to President Kennedy a report entitled Outdoor Recreation for America. That set in place exactly the structure in which we exist today as a collective community. It spoke to elevating this noble activity called outdoor recreation as a bureau within the Department of Interior. It spoke about expanding opportunities into the urban community and making parks readily accessible. It spoke about defining a revenue stream in support of outdoor recreation and conservation in general. So today we do have the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Although that act did not speak specifically to similar recognition of our collective cultural heritage, but in 1966, Congress did enact the Historic Preservation Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, that give us a national structure to preserving those places that are dear to us. But what came later on is so significant to the theme and the arguments on the part of Elwood and Steve and Margaret, is that there was recognition that this nation was not static, is not static. It will continue to grow, and there will be increasing demand to meet the needs of the increasing population not only in terms of expanding opportunities for quality outdoor recreation, a better understanding of our cultural and natural heritage, but also making sure that there is a structure that encourages, if not mandate, public involvement in the planning and the decision-making process. That is very important, very important. The Historic Preservation Act said that there will be public involvement in determining those things that we will save or will not save through the so-called Section 106 process. And President Nixon signed the National Environmental Policy Act that dictates under Section 102 there will be public involvement in planning process. And if I were to suggest, based on some 50 years of being associated in this business, where I think that we need to continue to give more involvement, again, as Elwood and Steve mentioned, is engaging folks not only in terms of hands-on recreational experiences, but bringing them into the fold in the planning and decision-making process. Too often, I think many of us go to planning meetings and in meetings where there are decision meetings, and there is not the face of America participating in that. So there has to be, it's imperative to engage all America in how we are protecting, how we're planning, how we're prioritizing the resources. My friends, at my age, it is easy to tell the truth because I am without portfolio and you can't call the boss on me, that we just have to do a better job. Because ultimately, the saving of those places that we call very special is in direct proportion to which the citizens care. Not a select group of citizens, but all America. There is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And people are beginning to become more aware that you vote for things you care for or you vote for things you don't care for. And parks, and Fish and Wildlife, Forest Service, they have to trot up to Capitol Hill. And Capitol Hill is more diverse than it was 150 years ago for sure. And they want to be responsive to their constituency. If their constituency do not care, why should I vote for? That's reality, my friends. That is reality, as we all know. I would like to conclude with sort of a philosophical view, because Steve and Elwood have given you all the directions and practical approaches, as was the case with the Beacon Award winners and the two panels that appeared before us. There has to be, I think, for us to sustain a level of commitment and conviction on our part, a philosophical underpinning in terms of the values of the business that we're in. And perhaps the value of that business is captured in how we translate or transfer or transform our experiences in recreational areas, park, refuge, forest, in which the water may be clear, highest quality, the air is something you can breathe, litter is not all over the place. We have a respect for the other species that inhabit this fragile place we call Earth. We have a respect for our next door camper, that become the exemplar for what we expect in our respective communities. Parks and other public lands are places of learning, places of encouragement. To salute my colleagues, I still say my colleagues in the Park Service, in the wisdom of its first director, Stephen Mather. For those who visit national parks should come away with a keener appreciation of living here in the United States. They should indeed become better citizens. And that's the bottom line. That is why we want to share the bounty through outreach to our young people in particular. And Congress has given you, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of tools along that line. The Youth Conservation Corps program, the Public Lands Corps. The Park Service has standalone authority to transport, to use its own money and capital and private money to transport young people from neighboring communities into parks for organized recreation and educational programs. Maximize those authorities. But in the end, what's sustained us over good times and difficult times is how we feel about the work we do and the value that it has to the larger community. And I would just acknowledge your leadership, your contributions, individually and collectively, for the work that you do to engage all America in America's great outdoors and to foster the partnerships. This young president left us all too soon on November the 22nd, 1963, in my home state of Texas. And he would remind us, and in his words, I am certain that when the dust of centuries has passed over our cities, we too will be remembered, not for our victories or defeats in battles or in politics, but rather, my friends, for our contributions to the human spirit. John F. Kennedy, thank you for your contributions. My spirit is high because of you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Derek. Thank you.